This is our prototype mid-range. In a recent video, we made 3 variations and over 3,000 of you ultimately voted on, well, that one. And these are 3 variations of that mid-range. As a disc golfer, you may know that dome gives a disc more glide, but does it really? We made 3 variations with more dome, a bead, and a higher parting line to test some of the most common disc design, well, myths. And today, we're gonna try to bust them. Hi, my name is Jesse at Panda, and this is the 3rd part in our series on designing a brand new mid-range. We started by testing 19 different mid-ranges, then we designed and 3D printed 3 different prototypes, and you all voted on which one we should make. But before we do that, we wanted to test something. Maybe you've heard that domey discs glide more, or that a bead makes a disc more overstable, or even that the parting line affects the flight of a disc. Well, today we're gonna go full Jamie Heineman and see if that's true. This disc was the baseline for all of the tests we performed, and it's a slightly re-engineered version of prototype number 2 from the last video, which over 50% of you voted on. And dome was the first variation we tested. When it comes to dome, there seems to be a varying opinion on how it affects stability, but an overall consensus on how it affects glide. The domier the disc is, the more it should glide, and the flatter the disc is, the less it'll glide. Plus, the farther you throw them, the more pronounced the difference will be. So we took our baseline prototype and designed a version with significantly more dome to see if that's really true. And then I met up with my buddy Jason from Another Round Denver, who I will affectionately refer to as my disc throwing robot friend until we build said robot. While the differences were subtle on camera, it was so obvious in person. And after throwing each disc a dozen times at almost exactly 300 feet each time, the domey version consistently floated to the ground rather than falling to the ground, was able to get more distance on a lower line, and flew 10 to 30 feet farther than its flat counterpart. So not only is the myth true, but you can test it for yourself. Go grab a Castoplast Berg, which has the definition of a puddle top, throw it a couple times, and then sign my petition to change the Berg's glide rating to -1. The second variation we tested was bead, and since our baseline prototype is non-beaded, we made this variation with a bead. If you've heard anything about beaded discs, it's probably that the bead causes a disc to be more stable to overstable. So we made a pretty significant size bead so that the results would be even more pronounced. And our assumptions were clear. However the baseline prototype flew, the beaded version would be significantly more overstable, right? This is where things got so interesting, because the bead didn't make it overstable at all. In fact, every single time it flew the exact same as the baseline prototype. So, of course, I did my due diligence and did some research. Turns out a lot of people, myself included, think that beads make discs more stable. But as I've come to learn, they don't. They actually just keep the discs stable for longer. So myth kinda busted. Unless that is you're smarter than me and already knew that. Then, congrats. Really quickly, I wanted to talk about one of the questions I get most often. What editing software do I use? Believe it or not, up until this year, I've simply been using iMovie. And while I continue to feel like it's a great resource and makes editing accessible to anyone, one of my goals for 2022 is to explore my creativity with a better editing software. And I'll be the first to admit, learning a new video editing software is super daunting. So I beelined straight to this video's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes designed to help people like you and me take the next step in our creative journey. It's basically just a place to find inspiration and learn new skills. So I took advantage of an incredibly comprehensive class by Ali Abdal called Video Editing with Final Cut Pro 10. Entering the class, my goal was simply to learn how to do everything I could do on iMovie, but my expectations were far exceeded. And as a YouTuber himself, I found Ali's tips and tricks to be so helpful. So whether you want to learn iMovie, Final Cut, the entire Adobe suite, or something else, Skillshare is offering a 1-month free trial to the first 1,000 people who use my link in the description. And you can start exploring your creativity today. Alright, on to our most interesting myth yet. The third variation might be the coolest one yet, but it's gonna need a little explaining. When a disc is made, the plastic is heated to a super hot temperature and then cooled. And when plastic cools, it shrinks. And to make things even more complicated, different plastics shrink at different rates, which can result in varying parting lines. For our purposes, I'll define what that means in simple terms, but a channel called Best Disc Golf Discs made a video about this that is, well, the best. And I've linked it below. This is our prototype putter mold, and all disc golf molds have a top plate and a bottom plate, and the point at which they meet is referred to as the parting line. So if you took two of the same disc and set them side by side on a table, that line might be at a varying height from the surface of the table. If that line's higher, that means less shrink and less turnover, and if it's lower, it means more shrink and more turnover. So, even though we didn't injection mold these prototypes, we attempted to replicate a higher parting line on this variation, which should ultimately make it more overstable. And, well, not a myth. So we did this whole thing for 3 reasons. First, I'm a massive fan of hands-on learning, and I wanted to bring you all along in the process in the hopes that you might learn something too. Second, I want to be like Adam Savage. Sue me. And third, our goal was to possibly make an even better prototype, but in the end, the baseline prototype ended up being too good not to make. So we're gonna make the mold, and then we'll post the final part in this series with the full-blown injection molded prototype, just like our last video with our putter. As always, thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe to support the channel, and we'll see you next time. So I actually learned 2 things in the making of this video that I didn't include earlier on, but I think are still super interesting. And the first one is why beads were made in the first place. In a thread by Reddit user IsaacSam98, he kind of tells the story that back in the day, beads were actually made because there were no premium plastics, and they allowed the disc to not only be more durable, but to act stable for longer. What? And the second thing is that when you bead in your discs, you're actually mimicking a lower parting line. Basically, by hitting a tree over and over and over with the same disc, you're mimicking lowering that parting line when you bead it in, and thus causing it to be more understable. So rad. Anyways, the more you know.